Have I ever seen a demon? I don't think you can say either way, because of course it depends upon classifications and categorizations and definitions. What I can say is I've had some forms of strange experiences as a result of, or seemingly as a result of, certain forms of religious ritual or activity, which was heavily dominated by meditation and other forms of all the states of consciousness practice, which led to something which could be regarded as being a strange experience. If I was more of a literalist or a superstitious individual, I would use phrases such as "it works" and "I have seen a demon." But I am not, and the reason I am not is because I've got a brain in my head and I'm not afraid to use it. The importance of skepticism when one is approaching someone else's use of language cannot be understated under any circumstances. Because if a person just changes the words that they're using ever so slightly, the meaning that they're trying to convey becomes distorted out of recognition and completely out of place. So what you end up with is people saying, "I have experienced a demon," when what they should be saying is, "Something strange happened, I don't know what it was." Now, this abuse of the language or misuse of language is something which is of course exploited by certain forms of religious groups, as I'm sure you're probably already aware, primarily for the purposes of developing fear as a means of trying to control people, which I personally regard as being deplorable. I mean, if your religion is about love, then why would you have to terrify someone into being loving? I mean, that makes no intellectual sense. So essentially it's not a question of religion, it's a question of out and out brainwashing. So that's something which we have to carry on reiterating. I mean, I do think that sometimes it doesn't matter what I say, because everyone's going to make up their own mind on the basis of the words that I've used. And they may very well misinterpret what I'm saying for their own ends and for their own purposes. But still, I'm going to carry on trying, just to try and get that level of perspective into people's minds. The bottom line is, it is difficult because of the preconceptions associated with supernaturalism. And the preconceptions are massive and really rather frightening in their irrationality. For instance, I carry on saying the same thing, I know, but I have to carry on saying it just to make sure that people understand. Just because you've had the experience of seeing a ghost does not mean to say that there is life after death, nor does it mean to say that ghosts exist. All you can say is you've had a strange experience under some circumstances, and it may make you capable of hypothesizing about certain possible consciousness-related issues, but essentially that would still have to remain a hypothesis. The phrase "it works" would be an intellectual and moral abhorrence associated with the subject. And people who take these, these what I regard as being spiritual literalist stances, those who carry on saying, "Oh, it works," and those who carry on saying, "Oh, this is proof that ghosts exist or there is life after death," these are the people who are actually holding back the movement. Alright, these are the people who are holding back the development of any form of intellectual research into these strange phenomena and what they could possibly achieve. That's why I'm here, that's why I'm doing this. So, let's get back onto the subject of demonology, because presumably that's why you're listening. What is demonology? Well, essentially it's a variety of religious practices which are assumed, when performed in a meditative state of mind, to have some forms of effect in communicating with apparent or alleged consciousness entities. That's all. Essentially the same varieties of method, ideology, and theories, or hypotheses I should say, are present in all forms of traditional nature-based religion and folklore. as well as in many schools of Christian thought. I mean, if you think about it, what is so different between an individual setting up an altar to, I don't know, St. Paul, okay, or St. Peter, and having an image or an icon of that particular saint, have the altar bedecked with candles and incense, which appears to be somehow appropriate to the message of that particular entity concept, and getting involved in prayer and contemplation of that particular being for the purposes of trying to communicate with it and trying to get some kind of message of one form or another from it, as opposed to someone taking a ceremonial dagger, for instance, and etching the sigil of a demon into the dust on the floor, doing vaguely Judeo-Christian stroke Wiccan ritual for the purposes of communicating with and commanding this particular spirit entity, or alleged or apparent spirit entity, to go out and do their bidding. There are similarities. Number one, the ceremonial aspects. Number two, the idea of the image of the thing, or the name of the thing, or something which represents the thing, being used as a means of enabling the individual to somehow connect with that particular consciousness. And then there's a presupposition that the consciousness of the magician or person in prayer, which is more or less the same thing, basically, can have some kind of influence upon this particular spiritual being, either receptive or transmissive, so to speak. So, if there is a difference between Christian veneration of saints and demonology, it is only a very slight one, and it is only very slightly semantically different. And in fact, the difference is probably so thin or so small as to make no real difference. Essentially, Christians who revere saints are no different in practice than pagans or Satanists who revere different forms of spirits in the form of runic letters or in the form of the spirits of the Lesser Key of Solomon. So, taking this into account, what we can do is try and research the methodologies that people have used to try and attempt to contact these spirits, and to try and replicate them. And through replicating them, we have to be humble to the fact that we know very little. Okay, we know very little. I mean, as a species, we know probably more about the surface of the moon than we do about the contents of our own oceans on our own planet. So how on earth is someone supposed to be able to make a hard truth claim about the nature of saints or demons or spirits or angels or ghosts, and to have these things regarded as a hard and fast fact? We cannot. Big time we cannot. So we have to be in a position of extreme humility to the fact that there's tons of things we don't know. But because we are in a position of thinking there's tons of things that we don't know, it would be intellectually flawed for us to move into paranoia and say, well, there's so many things we don't know, we mustn't get involved with these things, it would be terrible if we did. When essentially our drive as humans is to find out more about nature for our use. For our use as individuals, for our use as a society, and there really shouldn't be any blocks or obstacles preventing us from researching and exploring.